Welcome back to WCB Vinyl. Somehow for me, 2023 has been the year of Riverside Records. So I guess to kind of unpack that. So earlier this year, in fact, I think it was back in May, I was invited to co-host a 5-hour radio show with Jay Cohn and Steve Mandel, who are the founders of JMI Recordings. So basically, they put on a show every month or so on WKCR, which is a radio station based at Columbia University in Harlem. And that show is called Labeled. And in this show, again, about every month, they highlight a different record label each time. And basically they do like needle drop broadcasting, like in the olden days. So I traveled to New York from Atlanta and I brought along like 35 or so records from the Riverside label. And I put together a playlist basically to cover 3.5 hours of music. And then we filled the rest with some chatting. And so it was like queuing up vinyl and dropping the needle and playing it. And it was a lot of fun. And in retrospect, the most represented artist in my set list was Wes Montgomery. Because I love his music so much, and I thought that it was also, I don't know, I think his music is particularly conducive to that radio sort of broadcast format. All right, so there's that. There's the radio thing. Also, over the course of the year, if you think back to all of the like new reissues that have come out this year, we've had a number of really excellent Riverside reissues. So if I'm thinking about recently, you've got Kenny Dorham's Jazz Contrasts, right? That was on Newland Records. You've got, let's see, what else? The small batch release of Thelonious Monk's Brilliant Corners. We had the Vinyl Me Please reissue of Monk's music. There was the Chet Baker mono release by Kraft of his self-titled, and I think that was a Record Store Day edition. We recently had Bill Evans' Sunday at the Village Vanguard. Earlier in I think over the summer, we had Bill Evans's Waltz for Debbie. Just before the new year, we had a VMP release of The Three Faces of Yusef Lateef. If I'm thinking about box sets, gosh, we had 2 titles. We had Soft Winds, which is Riverside's Jazzland subsidiary release. And then we had the fantastic Jazz Harp of Dorothy Ashby, which was also on... No, actually, I'm sorry. That one was on Atlantic. So we had the one anyway that was on Jazzland, and that was in the Newland box set of Dorothy Ashby's work. So, okay, so to complete the picture, now we have the complete Full House recordings by Wes Montgomery. And this was a release that I chatted about with Nick Phillips, who is a producer for Kraft Recordings, a couple of videos ago, or maybe like a month or 6 weeks ago, something like that. Posted a video that was essentially just an interview or discussion with Nick about this release as well as the Sonny Rollins Go West box set. So anyway, to me, it feels like 2023 has been the year of Riverside, and I'm willing to bet that we're going to get even more because I just feel like in 2022 there wasn't nearly this much attention, and I feel like this attention is going to carry us into to 2024 at the very least. So something to be excited about. Anyway, following that interview with Nick, like maybe a month later, Kraft reached out and asked if I wanted a copy of this, and so of course I said yes, I want a copy of this, and they were kind enough to send this to me. So this is what we're going to talk about today. I only talked about it in theory. I hadn't actually heard this new release when I spoke with Nick. So now I'm going to give you some of my thoughts. Before we dive in, as always, please hit subscribe so that you're made aware of my upcoming videos. In fact, my very next one, I'm going to be giving away a copy of Thelonious Monk's Brilliant Corners, a small batch release. So definitely subscribe so that you know when that video hits. And head over to Instagram, post there every day. My handle is what_can_brown. All right, so as far as this release goes, let me tell you a little bit about, I guess, what you get. For those folks who didn't watch the video where I spoke with Nick Phillips about this, actually I'd encourage you to go watch that because he talks about this release, he talks about Sonny Rollins, he talks about a Savoy box set that he put together, like a lot of cool stuff. So I'll link that one in the description in case you missed it. But as far as this release goes, of the complete Full House recordings of by Wes Montgomery, So let's see. The lacquers here were cut by Kevin Gray, right? So good news there. We have mastering by Joe Tarantino. This is a triple disc, 180 gram gatefold set. So you can kind of see the gatefold here. And what it does, so this is the complete Full House recordings. What it does is it combines the original album just as it was on disc 1. So you're going to get, you get the original album as it's supposed to be, and then discs 2 and 3 are alternate takes, which it's kind of like a combination, I think, of, let me see, actually, is it outtakes? I think it's just all, I think there's 2 outtakes, and then there's some alternate takes. And actually, funnily enough, the outtakes aren't really as much outtakes as they are a track that never appeared in any format on the original album. The rest are like alternate takes of tracks that actually did appear on the album. So otherwise, from a cover standpoint, I mean, I mentioned it's a gatefold. The other thing that they did, which I think is actually really slick, is it kind of has it has this obi that's like almost like a fake obi. And I say fake only because, I mean, there is different information on the back of it. But I think what's really cool is that they don't detract from the original artwork. So when you have this in a sleeve, and despite the fact that you have the obi on it, it doesn't take away from the image. And I think that's I think it's really clever. And as much as everybody on this in this channel knows that I don't like obies, I actually think this is kind of a clever use of the obi specifically because it doesn't detract. The other thing as well is that there's kind of this like die cut lamination kind of thing for the cover, or excuse me, for the title. So the complete Full House recordings, as well as Wes Montgomery, is laminated, as is this image here, whereas the rest is matte. And in effect, it kind of has a little bit of that sort of that effect that Third Man did for their Electric Bird release, and I actually think that it is that it's pretty slick. So I mentioned a couple of things, I guess, about some of those tracks. So let me tell you in more detail exactly what's on this. So what this does is it brings together 2 versions of, I think, every track. So it's 2 versions of Full House, 2 of the track Blue and Boogie, 2 of Kariba, 2 of Come Rain or Come Shine, 3 of a track SOS, so they had 3 different takes, and then there's 2 of Born to Be Blue, and that last track, let me make sure what I'm saying is right. Yeah, Born to Be Blue is the only one that actually didn't make it on the original album. And I guess what you don't get is any additional version of the track I've Grown Accustomed to Her Face. So that's the only one where there's just the one, and it's the original. There's the original version. So what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that there is repetition across almost across the board. Obviously, they wanted to use the best take of each track, despite the live performance. Also of note is that on the original album, the original album as it was released, they spliced Montgomery's solo from a different take into the version that they used for the album. So the version that we've always heard on this album is, it's weird because they probably chose it because it's the best overall take of the track, but they decided that they wanted to use Montgomery's solo from the second one and they spliced it in. And I just think that's really interesting. So kind of some of the story behind this, I think, is a little bit interesting as well in terms of I guess how this was recorded and what the situation was on the day when they actually recorded this thing live. So first of all, let me talk about the engineer. So the engineer on this is a guy named Wally Heider. And Wally Heider is probably not as well known for us folks who are really into jazz music, but for those of you who are into like 70s rock, he'll be like 60s, 70s rock. He'll be a very familiar name probably. So Heider recorded Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, Santana, Grateful Dead, Creedence Clearwater Revival. He recorded the Beatles at the Hollywood Bowl in 1964. He recorded like the Monterey Pop Festival, the Monterey Jazz Festival. And actually, to give you a better sense maybe of his specific credentials, so at Heider's studio, I don't know that he was the engineer in every single one, but it was at least at the studio that he owned. The following albums were recorded. So Volunteers by Jefferson Airplane, Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere by Neil Young, Deja Vu by Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, Tupelo Honey by Van Morrison, American Beauty by the Grateful Dead, Green River by CCR, and Abraxas by Santana. And that's just a sort of small selection. Independent of the work that was done actually at Heider's studio, Heider was known for his mobile recording capability, which I think is probably why as this live performance came about, which by the way was very last minute, he was able to get his mobile unit like ready to go and head over to the venue to record it. So to the point about this coming together last minute, Miles Davis was in town in San Francisco. So this was recorded at I don't know how to pronounce the venue. Everybody out there probably does, but I have no idea. What is this, like Subo? I don't know. Anyway, it's in Berkeley, and that's the venue that it was recorded at. And basically, Miles Davis was in town with his crew, probably because they were on tour. And at that time, he was recording with touring with Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers, and Jimmy Cobb. So they were in town with Miles. Johnny Griffin also happened to be in town. And Wes Montgomery, I guess, had the opportunity to play at this venue. So last minute, he puts together this group. They happened to be recording again at this venue that was pretty popular, especially for Riverside already, because the album Cannonball Adderley Quintet in San Francisco was also recorded there. So they were probably known for jazz amongst other genres. But anyway, this thing kind of came together last minute. It was announced, I guess, on the radio. They were kind of promoting it, and basically it became like a big thing. So apparently, like hours before the session was supposed to start, there was a line around the block. Not everybody could get in. The thing was sold out, and they ended up having to set up like monitors in the outside with folding chairs and stuff, just so that everybody who wanted to hear this performance could hear it. So it seemed like it was a pretty big deal. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the music. And what I'm not going to do actually is a sonic comparison, and it isn't because I don't own a copy. I actually do own an original copy of this. I kind of wanted to focus a little bit more on this set for this thing. What I will say is that it's certainly better all around. It sounds better all around than the original in terms of noise floor, in terms of dynamics, in terms of sonic detail, all of those things. Now, do know that this is a live performance, and so you're not going to kind of get that very carefully curated kind of thing, especially with the stereo presentation, as you might have gotten in the studio. But what I will do is I'll point out the things that I think are highlights and the things that are maybe things they could have done a little bit better on that original recording. But any way you look at it, it's better than the original, and it just sounds more of like an audiophile kind of like live performance compared to that original. So in terms of that stereo sort of separation, you've got Wes Montgomery is in the center, and he sounds fantastic. You have Johnny Griffin, who sounds really punchy. He's in the left channel. I think he's an absolute highlight whenever he's playing. It just sounds really, really clear, really nice. There is a little bit of bleed to the right as well. So I mentioned he's in the left, but there's a little bit of bleed to the right, and that's not a problem. There's no echo or anything. I think it just helps with a little bit of the sort of three-dimensional quality to the music. Let's see, Jimmy Cobb is in the right along with Paul Chambers. And then the piano is in the left. Now, what I will say is the piano is slightly muted. The bass is probably slightly muted here as well, I would say, but that probably has to do with their placement relative to the microphones, and it's probably just kind of a outcome of the venue. You can still hear them. They're not like completely lost, don't get me wrong, and especially when they're soloing, you can definitely hear them very well. But overall, if I'm thinking about the blend, those are the two that may be just a little bit sort of less dynamic than the rest. All right, so let me see. I mean, Full House is the first track, and it sounds fantastic. As I mentioned, that's the one where they actually pulled the solo from the second, from an alternate take and brought it in. But you do, because this is the full recordings, you have the ability to actually hear both of them, and I think that's great because you get to hear what that original solo would have sounded like. One of the standards that they play, and this is actually the 3.5 minute one that I think I mentioned earlier, it's I've Grown Accustomed to Her Face. It is really sensitive. It's a quiet kind of Wes Montgomery feature, and he's playing really mostly just with like Jimmy Cobb's brushwork backing him up. There is a little bit of like sparse bass notes that are here and there throughout it, but it's just it's fantastic. I would say it stands out because it's by far the shortest. But it's also just one of the few ballads, and I think it's really nice. And you can tell as the audience responds how much they appreciated it as well. So to the point about this being the shortest track, I think every track is at least 7 minutes, and in fact, many of them, including those alternate takes, are at least 9 minutes. So what you get with this thing that maybe you don't get with Wes Montgomery's studio work for Riverside is you get a chance to hear him really go off in these sort of expansive solos. And I think it's really nice, especially at this time period, because later on when he went to Verve, he was playing a little bit more commercial music. And in some ways, I feel like some of the solos and like extended nature of it was just, it just lacked a little bit of like depth or meaning. It's like, why are you doing this? It just felt like a little bit more pandering. Whereas here, he's just playing these really, really inspired solos and playing more in a, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's still leaning into soul jazz, but it still has elements of hard bop. It just feels to me like just really, really interesting solos. And I love the idea that you can hear him go off in these sort of extended solos. Whereas on some of those studio albums, although he was allowed to play at length on some of the studio albums as well. But here, I don't know, you just get more of a sense of his sort of creative process. And so I thought that was really nice. All right, so otherwise, I mentioned this as a live performance. I think that, one of the things that I always pay attention to is what's the impact of the audience and how prominent is the audience. And it's funny to talk about this now because in my last video, I was talking about Sunday at the Village Vanguard and the impact of the audience noise and how prominent it was. Here, I would say that there's minimal audience chatter throughout the entire thing. You will hear some, especially right as they initiate or right as they start some of the tracks. You'll hear some approval of solos in the middle, and then you'll obviously hear the clapping at the end. But what you don't hear is this pervasive chatter that extends throughout the pieces. You really don't hear that whatsoever. And even when you do hear the audience, it feels like they're a little bit more muted, and typically as soon as they start clapping at the end, the track fades out. So this is not necessarily all about trying to preserve the complete live experience of hearing Wes Montgomery, but obviously you do get the feeling that it's a live performance because you hear some of it. So what I'm getting at is that it's not disruptive whatsoever, and you still get all the beauty of the performance. So I think I alluded to this maybe up front, but overall I would say that this edition is definitely more of an audiophile sounding recording compared to the original. So the original was flatter, not as dynamic. This one is much more dynamic, especially when you think about Johnny Griffin and you think about Wes Montgomery and to some extent Jimmy Cobb. But I think, as I mentioned, the bass and the piano are just a little bit less pronounced, and I'm sure that that's not a problem with this specific version. It's more of a thing that's just how it was recorded, and that's not entirely surprising for a live recording. I think it's difficult when you have some of these loud, in some cases amplified instruments, to also get these like fully acoustic instruments at the same level and get the right balance and everything. So it's not surprising. In any event, I think that I'm a huge Wes Montgomery fan. I love the additional content here because it does feel like there is something new, despite the fact that they're some of the same tracks. What you'll notice is that the timestamps on some of them differ by like 2 minutes. So there's definitely something more that you get between the different versions of some of these tracks, and I personally really enjoy that. I would say that if I'm thinking about Wes Montgomery's work, that Full House is the best live performance I've ever heard of Wes Montgomery, and I would say that out of all of his albums, I think it's probably a top 3 for me. I really like this album. I'd say probably alongside the incredible jazz guitar of Wes Montgomery, and then boss guitar. Those are probably my top 3. So the fact that Kraft decided to reissue this along with this additional content, I think is phenomenal. So that's kind of those are my comments. I know this one's a little bit shorter than some, but that's a little bit by design. I kind of just got this thing in. I've listened to it completely through like once, and I just wanted to jump on and give you my sort of first reactions. But definitely excited for this thing. I know it's going to get some more spins. So yeah, that's it. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.